Hello, everybody, and very warm welcome to a special edition of the Double Waved Yellows podcast. It's VSC content. No, not virtual safety car, but very special content because this weekend for the British Grand Prix, we have the first ever trial of sprint qualifying. And joining me on the commentary box to discuss all this is Hodders. Hodders, something exciting, something new. Always excited to have a look at these sorts of suggestions for Formula One race weekends.
Absolutely. I mean, Formula One, all the formulas have always been at the forefront of innovation, and bringing in something that everyone's accustomed to in other formula formats is very much welcome.
Absolutely. So we'll explain what's going to happen with this weekend's sprint qualifying. So coming up, we'll explain to you what is sprint qualifying. We're going to explain to you what effect and changes this will have to the weekend schedule. We're going to explain to you how this will affect the tyre strategies across the race weekend, because it is something that is going to be something that the team managers and the engineers are going to have to get right from the word go. We're also going to explain what effects this may have on the race weekend, so in particular the qualifying and the Grand Prix on Sunday. So, sprint qualifying, how does it work? So the normal knockout qualifying that we are used to seeing will replace practice 2 on Friday. The result of qualifying sets the grid for a sprint qualifying. Sprint qualifying happens on Saturday evenings. It's basically a short distance race of about 100 kilometres, or about a third of the race distance, or depending on safety cars or rain, it will be limited to 1 hour. The top 3 from sprint qualifying score points: 3 points for first, 2 points for second, and 1 point for third. And the result of sprint qualifying sets the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix. So the change to the weekend format. So practice 1 is on Friday afternoons now instead of Friday mornings. Hodders, it allows for more time for the support series to get to show off their racing pedigrees.
Absolutely, and the more time the merrier, considering that this weekend we've got not only Formula 1 but also Formula 2 and my personal favourite, the W Series as well, at Silverstone for the first time. So I'm looking forward to that, and they get the breathing space to do that as well and show their stuff.
Great stuff. And practice 1 is going to be so important, more so than ever, because at the start of qualifying, the cars are in parc ferme. So Hodders, any mistakes during practice 1 could have a massive effect going forward throughout the entire weekend.
Absolutely. I mean, if we end up like, I don't know, some previous practice sessions the last few weeks where there's several red flags, if somebody has a real major crash during practice 1, that could be their weekend completely gone in one go.
Absolutely. So, yeah, parc ferme starts when the cars leave the pit lane for the qualifying session, which happens on Friday evening. On Saturday afternoon, we'll have practice 2. So again, Saturday morning will be all clear for the support series and also for any work that the mechanics are able to undertake, depending on what the parc ferme rules are. On the Saturday evening, we have sprint qualifying, and then Sunday afternoon is the Grand Prix. So we're going to have a look at the tyre allocations, because it is slightly different for events that have the sprint qualifying in place. So they have 12 sets of dry tyres. They have 6 of the red marked soft tyres, 4 of the yellow marked mediums, and 2 of the white marked hards. So that's 2 less soft sets of the soft tyre and 1 extra set of mediums. There are no tyre restrictions in terms of qualifying. So those who get into qualifying 3, they don't have to start the race on the set they used in Q2. So that restriction is out for this weekend. So in general, there's 1 set of the soft tyres that is strictly reserved for qualifying 3 only. So if you get to qualifying 3, there is a special set of soft tyres that are reserved just for you, but you can't take it through to sprint qualifying or indeed the race itself. There's also a regulation that states that you have to have a set of the mediums and hards for races. You can use it throughout practice, throughout qualifying, throughout sprint qualifying, but you can't hand it back to the race stewards until after the race on Sunday. So for practice 1, we've been looking at Form1.com, and they've given a rough guide as to how it's likely this will work. So it's likely that teams will use the hard tyres just to do 1 or 2 installation laps just to make sure the cars are all working fine. And then it's likely that they will do simulations for qualifying and sprint qualifying. So that'll be on the soft tyres. At the end of practice 1, they have to return a set of tyres. Hodders, from a strategic point of view, it makes the most sense for them to return the soft tyres.
Absolutely, it makes perfect sense to return the soft tyres because you may as well keep those in reserve for the race day, particularly when we've noticed in recent race weekends where sometimes the softs have remained reserved for those who want to get that little extra push towards the end of the race, or indeed, if they're leading or trying to pull out a deficit, a fastest lap.
But also, Hodders, they don't want to be returning a set of the hard tyres or the medium tyres because that will seriously hinder them for sprint qualifying and the race.
It absolutely will, because there may be occasions where they might want to use the softer tyres for the race, whereas the sprint qualifying, sometimes, considering there are no mandatory pit stops, mind you, it might have more currency in using the harder tyres so they don't have to stop at all if they can absolutely help it.
So moving on to the qualifying, they can only use soft tyres during qualifying unless, of course, we have a bit of precipitation. They get a maximum of 4 sets for qualifying 1 and qualifying 2. However, there is an extra set, as previously mentioned, reserved for qualifying 3 only. The set used in Q3 and 1 other set has to be returned to the stewards, but they can no longer use for that weekend. And as also mentioned, the set used in qualifying 2 for the top 10, they don't need to use it in the race. Hodders, this is where teams that are economic on their tyres in terms of using them on the softs, this is where it's going to be really important, because if you have a really bad run all the way through to qualifying 3, you could end up using all of your sets of soft tyres. That means you're going to potentially have no brand new sets of softs going into practice 2, sprint qualifying, or the race itself.
Absolutely. When you consider the time differences between the different firmnesses of the tyres, if you use all your softs too quickly, you're going to leave yourself in a very compromising situation and very much be fettering away several places on the grid and indeed in the final standings if you're not careful.
But equally, this is where we're going to see drivers that are really, really good with managing their tyres, drivers that can get through to Q1 okay, not having to push too crazy. Q2 they have to push a little bit, but then they've got that free set in Q3, which means that they could potentially go into the rest of the weekend with 2, possibly 3 brand new sets of softs, which could be so critical for race time.
Absolutely. I mean, that's going to be one very big difference when it comes to the qualifying this time, is that they're not going to be beholden to using what they used in Q3 in the actual race, which means those who are more savvy with tyre management could use a slightly firmer tyre in qualifying, and then they could just very easily switch to a softer tyre to begin with if they so choose. It gives them that tactical advantage if they're clever.
Absolutely. So moving on to practice 2. And we're likely to see teams doing long runs on the medians or the hards, getting data possibly for sprint qualifying, but also for the race. And Hodders, the cars are still under park firmness, but they need to be so careful, because any mistakes in practice 2 is obviously going to affect them for the Grand Prix, but also it could potentially put them out of sprint qualifying, which means they're going to be much further back down the grid for Sunday.
Absolutely. Once again, it's one of those situations where entering P1, one mistake in P2 could really hinder you with the park firm conditions. Again, if it's catastrophic, it could rule you out the whole weekend. But if it's something more minor, again, it could still really count against you, both in sprint qualifying and the race day itself.
Yeah, and again, at the end of practice 2, they have to return the set tyres which they use the most in practice 2. Again, we're thinking it is likely going to be the medium tyres because you don't want to be returning a set of hard tyres because then that really hinders you for both sprint qualifying and the race. Whereas we're thinking it's likely that they'll need at least one set of the hard tyres for basically each of the race, effectively, one for the sprint qualifying and one for the race itself.
Absolutely, as I said before, I think drivers are going to favour the harder tyres when it comes to the sprint qualifying, particularly when there is no requirement to take a pit stop, and obviously longevity on the track when going for those points and positions is going to be so crucial. And again, keeping one in reserve for the race, because once again, the fewer pit stops you can manage if you're in a good position, the better. And obviously, tyre management is going to be absolutely key, and the better you are at it, the better your chances.
Yeah, indeed so. So we come into sprint qualifying. Again, we suspect that they're likely to use the mediums or the hards. They can use the softs, but from what Formula1.com are telling us, the soft tyres won't provide the performance over the 100-kilometre race distance. And then at the end of the sprint qualifying, they have to return a set of tyres. And how does it make sense at this point that they will return the set of tyres they used during the race? That's assuming, of course, they don't make any pit stops.
Very much so. And again, as I said before, I think they'll be trying to avoid pit stops wherever they can, purely so they can return the better tyre set for the race and help themselves out in the long run.
So this is where the strategy is going to really come in, because do you use a set of mediums during the sprint qualifying, help you to get effectively a better grid position and potentially points, or and obviously you won't really be using those medium tyres in the race when there's bigger payout, or do you use the hard tyres, giving you a much better tyre strategy availability for the race, but obviously it may put you further down the grid for the starts. It's a bit of a dilemma in it, Hodders.
It really, really is. I think this is one of the reasons I like the sprint qualifying so far, is those who have been a little, shall we say, less savvy when it comes to time management are really going to have to think hard, as are the teams as well. We've seen before that time management can cost you races, and in this case, it really can.
Indeed. So we're going to give our views on the sprint qualifying. For me, I'm really, really excited to see how it will work. There's been numerous suggestions over the last few years about how could they change the Formula One race weekend to make it more exciting. There have been suggestions of reverse grids, which they're not doing, but also a change to the qualifying. And at least with this one, they can say, okay, we tried it. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, they can at least say, yeah, we tried it. Hodders, at least they've actually taken the time to think about this. They haven't used that 2016 qualifying knockout format, which was frankly a farce.
I think it's one of those situations here where I think F1 have realised, okay, we've made mistakes before. Let's see if we've learnt from them. Let's give it a try, see how it works. If it works, maybe it'll come in further in future seasons. If it doesn't work, they've at least given it an effort and given it a damn good try at the same time.
Absolutely. Hodders, what are your views on this? Can you see any pros, any cons to this new format that could be potentially being introduced for the future?
I think there's more pros than cons. I mean, I think the pros is that it's trialling a change to the tried and tested format. And I've always been the sort of person who, for the main part, tends to welcome change as a trial if it improves the race weekend. I'm not saying the race weekends become stale or anything like that, but I think particularly those who have watched Formula 2 and Formula 3 with their race formats may well be quite excited about Formula 1 at least trying this. I mean, we'll see how we go after this weekend and see what we think then. I think this could be an exciting new sort of next few years for F1, particularly with those who are returning to Formula 1 after a number of years, as I have, I should point out. I've not watched for a number of years till this season. And also younger fans will find it quite interesting as well, because it adds a bit more excitement, a bit less predictability to it. And that way it also means that teams have to really, really strategize. That's one possible con, not a bad con by any means. but teams are going to have to work a heck of a lot harder on tyre management and everything else. And I wouldn't be surprised if some teams may change their mind about it or be not so keen, depending on how this weekend goes.
Mm-hmm. And there's two key bits actually we haven't discussed, Hodder, which I think is really, really important. Sprint qualifying, we are going to see the drivers driving flat out. No tyre conservation, no strategy, no pit stop, doing what they love doing, which is racing, just going flat out. And I can't wait to see that.
I'm really looking forward to it. And I think what might also be of interest is I think the sprint qualifying may well give a better indication of how the race itself is going to go. I mean, you're bearing in mind that standard qualifying for the main part is, I suppose you could almost compare it to when you're trying something out in a laboratory. You're aiming for optimum conditions, but they may not necessarily reflect real life. Whereas in this case, you're doing sprint qualifying where it's pretty much full-on real racing. So it may give us some indications of how the Sunday race could go based on that alone.
Yeah, you mentioned that. We're used to seeing drivers who do really, really well on Saturday one-lap qualifying, such as George Russell, do really, really well. Whereas the drivers who are going to be further up the grid for Sunday are going to be the drivers who can consistently bang out those really, really good laps. So that's going to be a key element. One other element we haven't discussed, it's unlikely to happen for this weekend, is if the weekend at all is disrupted with wet weather.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, if anything, I think for this first tryout of the sprint qualifying, I've had a look, and we can agree the conditions could not be more perfect. It's going to be warm, it's going to be sunny, the chance of rain is 0. I mean, I think it's maybe completely 0, but it's very, very, very unlikely. I mean, I think we can safely say that pigs will still remain on the ground rather than take flight in this case. Never impossible. But I think the weather, when it is wet, that could seriously affect the weekend in general, but we will have to wait and see how it goes, particularly later in the year as we get towards late summer, early autumn, with some of the other races where they're going to try it out. That will be the real acid test. But this first round is a good one under optimum conditions to see how it goes.
Yeah, it's the sort of conditions where you haven't got any undue outside influences affecting it. You can try sprint qualifying in an ideal format, which is great. And obviously, the fact is, it's at Silverstone at the British Grand Prix, where 71 years ago Formula One first started, and also in front of what we are thinking is going to be 140,000 spectators on race day. Would be absolutely fantastic. So, just to let you know what else is coming up on the Double Waved podcast, Double Wave Yellow's podcast channel in the next few weeks. So next Friday we'll be reviewing the events of the British Grand Prix, including the sprint qualifying event. 2 weeks after that, we will be having a look at the actions in Budapest for the Hungarian Grand Prix before the F1 community takes a summer break, but we're not, because we have 2 VSC podcasts lined up. On the 13th of August, we're going to be having a half-term report. We're going to be having a look and see who's top of the class, who could do better, and who needs to stay behind for detention. And then on the 20th of August, we're going to have a look at the battle of Max versus Lewis as we head into the second half of the season. Hodders, as always, thank you very much for joining us for this VSC podcast. Hopefully the sprint qualifying provides some real excitement and maybe throws up a twist or two for the race.
Absolutely. It's been great being on again, and I'm very much looking forward to this. I mean, this is something new. It's the first time it's being done, and where better to do it than on home turf at Silverstone?
Absolutely. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, but don't forget to like and subscribe as well. That's very important. My thanks to you for listening. Enjoy this weekend's British Grand Prix. Be good, and if you can't be good, be safe. From myself and Hodders, take care. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.